What happens when someone dares to challenge the most powerful man in the room? On a private jet, high above the clouds, a woman known for her strength and independence faced the arrogance of a CEO who believed he could control anyone and anything. He mocked her. Success laughed at her achievements and treated her presence as if it was nothing more than an accident. But in that moment, she chose not silence, but action. A single slap shattered the air, and with it the illusion of his untouchable power. What followed was not just personal revenge, but the unveiling of deep social injustice. As a man who had crushed others with wealth and influence finally met someone unafraid to stand against him, the suspense grew with every step as secrets of corruption slowly came to light, and in a shocking twist, the hunter became the hunted, and the slap that once seemed reckless turned into the strike that shook an empire. She was not just a woman of wealth, but of willpower, a self-made figure who owned her own private jet and carried herself with unshakable confidence. The jet was more than transport. It was a symbol of her independence, yet the moment a powerful CEO stepped inside, the air shifted. He walked with arrogance, expecting respect and control, as if every room and every person existed only to serve him. His eyes scanned her with a dismissive glance, and his smirk carried the weight of entitlement. The passengers could sense the tension rising, an invisible clash of pride and power. She remained calm, but inside the fire of defiance was already burning. The imbalance was clear, a man used to commanding fear against a woman unwilling to bend. What no one knew was that this meeting would not remain a simple flight. It would spark a chain of revenge, expose social injustice, and end with a shocking twist that no one could predict. The silence inside the jet was sharp enough to cut through glass as the CEO leaned back in his seat, his voice dripping with mockery as he began to tear down the very woman who had welcomed him on board. He laughed at her story of success, calling it nothing more than luck, insisting that real power belonged to men who built empires with steel, not women who stumbled into wealth. His tone was not casual. It was calculated, every word designed to strike her confidence in front of the watching eyes of those around them. The arrogance in his voice grew heavier with each sentence, as he reminded her that people like him could buy people like her with a single deal. His laughter echoed in the cabin, a sound that carried the weight of humiliation and injustice. She sat still, her calm face hiding the storm within while her patience was tested beyond measure. The crew glanced nervously at each other, sensing the spark that was about to ignite. Some passengers shifted uncomfortably, knowing they were witnessing a moment that could not be undone. The CEO leaned forward, his voice lowering into a threatening whisper that still carried across the jet, narrowing his eyes. He told her that women like her were only ornaments in the world of business, that she should be grateful to even sit at the same table as men of his stature. The words struck not only at her pride, but at every unspoken truth of social injustice that powerful men like him had forced upon countless others. Her hand tightened against the armrest, her heartbeat steady yet fierce, the fire in her eyes betraying the calm mask she wore. He mistook her silence for weakness, pushing further, taunting her, telling her that her empire was fragile, and her name meant nothing without approval from men like him. He smirked, leaning back, satisfied that he had broken her spirit. Yet he was blind to the storm gathering in the quiet of her gaze. Every second of silence was not surrender, but preparation. Each insult that left his lips was building toward a breaking point. The tension in the jet grew unbearable, as if the very walls were holding their breath. Everyone waited for her to crumble or to lash out, yet she remained still like a predator, choosing the perfect moment to strike. The suspense was thick, every eye fixed on her, every second dragging heavier than the last. The CEO raised his glass of wine, smirking as if he had already won. But he did not see that the balance of power was already shifting in a way he could not control. In that charged silence, she was no longer simply a woman enduring insults. She was becoming the embodiment of defiance, and the spark he had lit with his arrogance was about to turn into the fire that would consume them both. The glass of wine had barely touched his lips when she rose from her seat, with a calmness that betrayed the storm raging inside her. The movement was so sudden, so deliberate, that every head in the jet turned at once, before anyone could process what was about to happen. Her hand cut through the heavy silence and landed across his face with a sharp crack that echoed louder than any word ever spoken in that cabin. The CEO's smirk vanished instantly, replaced by a stunned expression that stripped him of the arrogance he had carried so proudly. Moments earlier, he was the untouchable giant, mocking her existence and belittling her achievements. But in that single instant, the illusion shattered. The jet fell into complete silence, so heavy, that it seemed the air itself refused to move. The crew froze. The passengers stared wide-eyed. No one dared to breathe. Every gaze was locked on her hand, still trembling slightly from the force of the slap, and on his face now burning with shock and humiliation. He did not speak. Not at first, his pride wounded deeper than the sting on his cheek. The silence was not just silence. It was a declaration of war, an invisible line drawn between a woman who refused to bow and a man who had never been challenged before. For years he had thrived on fear, bending people to his will, crushing reputations with a word. But here, on her jet before witnesses, he was stripped of his armor and brought down not with power or wealth, but with the courage of defiance. That single slap was more than an act of anger. It was a rebellion against the injustice of men like him who believed dominance was their birthright. The suspense in the room grew unbearable, as if time itself had paused to watch the shift of power play out. He tried to recover his composure, his jaw tightening his fists, clenching his voice, finally breaking through the silence as he hissed that she would regret this. But even in his threat, there was a tremor, a crack in the steel of his authority. Everyone saw it. Everyone felt it. The slap had not just marked his face, it had marked the fall of his dominance. She stood unmoving, her eyes locked on his, not with fear, but with a quiet strength that spoke louder than words. The crew knew this moment would travel far beyond the walls of this jet. The story would live as a symbol of defiance against arrogance and abuse of power. He leaned forward, his voice low, his rage hidden under a whisper, promising revenge, promising to destroy her. But the damage was done. The world inside that cabin had shifted, and everyone could see that the power he once held in his shadow had now slipped into her hands. The slap was not the end. It was the beginning of a storm that would shake more than one man's ego, it would shake an empire. The sting on his cheek was nothing compared to the wound in his pride, and as he sat there, his eyes burning with rage, the humiliated CEO made a silent oath that he would make her pay for daring to challenge him. When the jet finally touched the ground, he walked away without another word. But behind the calm mask, his mind was already turning with schemes of revenge. He was a man who had built his empire on fear and manipulation, a man who believed that no one, not even governments, could resist his power. And now he was determined to use every weapon at his disposal to crush the woman who had embarrassed him. He made calls in private rooms, whispered threats through powerful allies, and in just days, the storm began to hit her world. Deals that had taken years to secure, suddenly collapsed contracts were cancelled. Without explanation, investors pulled out under mysterious pressure, and headlines appeared questioning her credibility. The media that once praised her success now painted her as reckless and arrogant, feeding on rumors planted carefully by his influence. She felt the walls closing in as friends turned distant and allies chose silence over loyalty. The whispers grew louder in the business world, people saying she had crossed a line that could not be crossed, that no one challenged him and survived. The injustice was sharp, every strike against her, not because of her mistakes, but because she had refused to bow to a man's arrogance. He used money to bend, the narrative power to twist the truth, and fear to silence those who might have defended her. Yet through the chaos, she did not crumble. Instead, she walked through the storm with her head held high, even as the weight of his revenge pressed harder. With every passing day, the suspense tightened around her like a noose. Could she survive a man with endless resources? Could she withstand the force of an empire determined to erase her name? The world watched silently, some with pity, some with doubt, others secretly hoping she might succeed where so many had failed. She understood now that the slap had not just bruised his face, it had exposed his weakness, and for that he would stop at nothing to destroy her. But what he could not see was that with every blow he delivered, she was learning his patterns, studying his moves, and preparing her own strike. He believed he was the hunter, reclaiming his dominance. But the truth was different. The balance of power had already begun to shift, though. He was too blinded by rage to notice. His arrogance had lit the fire, and now his obsession with revenge was feeding it. She had lost battles, contracts, allies, but deep within, she was building something stronger. A plan that would not only protect her, but threaten everything he had ever built, and the suspense of when she would strike back was becoming the shadow that haunted his every move. The storm he unleashed on her life did not pass quickly. It grew darker with each day, dragging her name through the mud and shaking the foundation she had built with years of hard work. One by one, her trusted partners distanced themselves, not because she had failed them, but because they feared the shadow of the man she had struck down on her jet deals collapsed before signatures could dry. Investors withdrew without explanations, and opportunities vanished as if the world had decided she no longer deserved her place. Every headline screamed scandal. Every whisper in the business corridors carried the same cruel message that she had challenged the wrong man and that no woman could dare stand against him without paying the ultimate price. Friends she once trusted betrayed her, choosing comfort over loyalty, while others who had once admired her success quietly turned their backs in fear of losing their own security. The injustice was heavy, each betrayal like a knife pressed deeper into her back, yet she endured with an iron calm, refusing to give him the satisfaction of seeing her break. He wanted her humiliated, stripped of pride, and begging for mercy, but she would not bend instead. Every loss hardened her resolve, and every whisper of doubt fueled the fire of defiance inside her. She knew the world was watching, some expecting her to fall, others secretly praying she would rise and prove that power built on arrogance could be destroyed. The suspense grew thicker with every passing day, as people wondered how long she could stand before the weight of his revenge crushed her completely. She walked through the storm carrying herself with a strength that defied the narrative he tried to force upon her, and though the empire around her seemed to be collapsing, she began to see through the cracks in his armor. She realized that the louder he struck, the more desperate he became, and desperation was a weakness no amount of wealth could hide. He thought he was breaking her, but in reality, he was forging her into something far stronger than before. Her patience sharpened into strategy. Her pain became focus, and her isolation became freedom to plan without interference. The same world that whispered she had lost everything did not see the fire she was quietly building behind the curtain of silence. He had underestimated her, believing she would collapse like so many before her. Yet he did not understand that she was not fighting for survival. She was preparing for victory. The more he pushed her down, the more determined she became to rise again, and not just rise, but rise in a way that would shake his empire to its core. The struggle was brutal, filled with betrayal and loss, yet it was in this struggle that she transformed from a woman under attack into a force ready to strike back with a vengeance that would change everything. She had lost partners and contracts. She had been painted as reckless and arrogant, and yet beneath the ashes of her ruined reputation, she was already crafting the very weapon that would turn her struggle into his downfall. The world believed she was defeated, but in the silence of her isolation, she began to gather pieces of truth that no amount of money or power could bury. She dug deep into the shadows of his empire, tracing the whispers of corruption, the hidden deals sealed with bribes, the offshore accounts that carried stolen fortunes, and the trails of people silenced by his influence. Each discovery was another crack in the glass tower he had built, and she stored them carefully, knowing that timing was everything she did not move loudly. She did not announce her plan. She moved like a shadow, collecting evidence that could not be denied: documents, recordings, testimonies from those who had once feared him but now saw in her the courage they never had. She built her case, slowly, patiently, with the precision of a hunter waiting for the perfect strike. He still believed he had broken her. He still flaunted his power in public, still mocked her name in private circles. But what he did not see was that the walls of his empire were beginning to close in on him from within. The very people he trusted began to doubt his strength, sensing the storm that was quietly building. His arrogance blinded him to the signs, the hesitation of his allies, the cracks in his boardroom, the nervous glances of men who once bowed to his every word. She fed the truth into the right hands, journalists hungry for a story, regulators eager to expose a scandal, and slowly the whispers began to change. The narrative turned, suspicion spread, and questions rose louder than his money could silence. The suspense grew as the world started asking what lay behind his mask of success. He fought back desperately, throwing his wealth at problems, silencing media outlets, threatening those who dared to speak. But it was too late. The cracks were widening, and his empire was trembling. She watched from a distance, with calm eyes, knowing that every desperate move he made only drew more attention to his guilt. What began as her personal revenge had grown into something larger. It had become justice for those crushed under his power, for the countless voices silenced by his greed and arrogance. He had tried to destroy her with influence and fear, but now his own corruption was the weapon, tearing him apart. The hunter was becoming the prey, and the empire he once believed untouchable was crumbling piece by piece under the weight of his own sins. She had waited, endured, and planned, and now the stage was set for a reckoning that would not only strip him of power but expose him before the world. The moment she had been building toward arrived, not with a whisper, but with a thunder that shook the very ground beneath his empire. For weeks the pieces had been falling into place quietly and carefully, until finally she chose her moment and released everything at once. Documents leaked to the press, exposed secret accounts, bribes paid to officials, illegal deals buried under forged contracts, and testimonies from those he had silenced with threats spilled across headlines. His face appeared, not as a symbol of power, but as the embodiment of greed and corruption. The story spread like wildfire, impossible to contain, and within hours the world that once praised him now demanded answers. The same board members who once obeyed him without question now turned their backs, fearing for their own survival. Investors withdrew in panic, governments launched investigations, and partners rushed to distance themselves from the man they had once called untouchable. Professionally, his empire collapsed like a house of cards. Contracts, frozen offices, raided accounts, seized the arrogance that once shielded him, shattered under the weight of undeniable truth. But the real blow came not in the boardrooms, but in the silence of those closest to him. Allies he had trusted for decades disappeared overnight. Friends who had benefited from his wealth suddenly cut ties, and even family members who once stood proudly beside him refused to be dragged down with him. The isolation was complete. The man who once commanded fear was now abandoned in shame. She watched it all unfold, not with gloating, but with a calm, steady satisfaction, knowing that the slap which had sparked his revenge was now the symbol of his ruin. What he had intended, as her destruction had become his own downfall. The suspense reached its peak as he tried desperately to fight back, calling the leaks, lies, pleading for loyalty, threatening those who left him. But no one listened anymore. His words carried no weight. His threats, no fear. He had been stripped bare before the world. His professional crown had been torn away. But worse was the personal humiliation, the mask of invincibility gone forever. He was no longer feared, he was pitied or despised, a shadow of the giant he once was. The shocking twist was not only that she exposed him, but that the same people who once trembled at his name now turned away as if he had never mattered at all. The power he worshipped had slipped from his hands and flowed into hers, not because she bought it, not because she demanded it, but because she dared to stand when everyone else bowed. In that twist of fate, the hunter became the hunted, and the woman he thought he could crush became the one who shattered his empire and rewrote the story of justice. When the dust finally settled, she did not stand as a victim of his wrath, but as a symbol of courage, a reminder that silence in the face of Arrogance only feeds injustice. She had endured betrayal, isolation, and loss, yet instead of breaking, she transformed her struggle into a weapon that not only protected her, but exposed the corruption of a man who believed he could never fall. The world now saw him not as a leader, but as a warning, a tyrant undone by his own pride, abandoned by those who once bowed to his power. His empire lay in ruins, his name tarnished beyond repair while she walked away, stronger than ever, her head held high, and her story echoing across every room where power tried to silence truth. In the end, one slap on a private jet became more than defiance. It became the strike that shattered an empire and rewrote what justice truly meant.